Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to MCOA's Zoom workshop on expanding mobility in small and rural towns. Few housekeeping items we wanted to keep in mind. Can you please mute yourself? This session is now being recorded, and we'd like you to please rename yourself to include your COA. And lastly, please submit your questions to Rachel, Kate, or Leanne through the chat option at the bottom of your screen. And I'd like to introduce our speakers today. This afternoon, we have presenters Rachel Fitchenbaum. She is from the Mass Mobility since 2011. She is sharing information and providing technical assistance to improve mobility for older adults, people with disabilities, and others who lack access to transportation to all parts of Massachusetts. And we also, joining us is Kate Bavlock, as she's been the Director of Community Programs at Hilltown Community Development, where she manages programs in transportation, food access, the Hilltown Mobile Market, Keep Farming in the Hilltowns, and Arts and Culture. And we also have Leanne Taylor. She serves as the Program Manager for Walk Boston, a statewide pedestrian advocacy organization that works to make Massachusetts more walkable. So Rachel, you can start and take it away.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you to MCOA for having us, and thanks to all of you for coming to our session on expanding mobility in small and rural towns. I'm going to start off with an introduction to mass mobility and the resources that we offer that might be able to help you as you're thinking about mobility and transportation in your town. And then we'll hear about some creative things that they're doing in the Hilltown from Kate. And then we'll hear about age-friendly walking from Leanne. And we thought that in order to make this as interactive and useful as possible to you, that we would pause briefly after each presentation in case there's questions or things you want to share related to that presentation. So please, as Susan said, at any point, please put things in the chat if you have questions for us or things from your town that you want to share related to this topic. So Mass Mobility is an initiative out of the Executive Office of Health and Human Services for the state. And our goal is to help any organization, such as Councils on Aging, that is working to increase mobility for older adults, people with disabilities, or others who lack access to transportation. We do that two main ways. One thing we do is we raise awareness of existing services that are out there, because sometimes someone is stuck at home, but there actually is a transportation option they could be using if they only knew about it. But other times there is no transportation option where they want to go that would take them when they want to get there or that meets their needs and preferences. So we also work with organizations to think about what they could do to expand mobility for their consumers, whether that's partnering with somebody, another organization, or implementing a program, whatever that might look like. So I wanted to highlight some of our resources that we have that might be of use to you so that you know about them. And MCOA will be sharing these slides, so you will have access to this and to any of the links here that you might want to look at later. So one thing we have is a website with a lot of information about transportation and strategies for mobility. And I put a URL here that is specifically our page targeted to human service agencies, which includes Councils on Aging, with information on different approaches. So for example, we have a web page on developing a volunteer driver program with some examples from programs in other towns. I also do a monthly newsletter, which goes out by email. And that's not an email about what I'm doing every month. It's about what you all are doing every month related to transportation. So what's new, what's happening around the state, what new programs or approaches are being tried, or what new grants are available. There's a picture here of our most recent issue, the June issue from last week. And I'm always looking for tips. I'm trying to learn what's happening around the state. But please, anytime any of you are doing something new or different with transportation, please let me know. I'd love to feature your work in the newsletter. Sometimes when there's a particular topic that emerges as something of interest to lots of different folks around the state, we do a short report on it and publish that. And so, for example, we've done that on ways that organizations have collaborated to address healthcare transportation needs, or how Councils on Aging have coordinated their transportation together. And last year, working with the Governor's Council to Address Aging, I had the chance to put together a training for new staff about transportation. And it's two parts. One part is about finding transportation in your community. What are the different options that might be available? And the other part is about creative approaches to expanding mobility options. And there's a video and supplemental links for each part. Some of the types of tools that you'll find on our website or in our newsletter, one is RideMatch. If anyone isn't already familiar with RideMatch, this was developed by one of the regional transit authorities in the state. It's a searchable database, it's online, and it has public and private transportation options. So you can search by your town, or you can put in the trip you're trying to make, where you're starting, where you're going, and get a list of public transit, paratransit, Council on Aging services, volunteer driver programs, taxis, livery, whatever is available to make that trip. And it was designed specifically with older adults and people with disabilities in mind. So right on the front page, you can check off some common accommodations you might need to be able to make that trip successfully. And if you haven't checked this out, I would recommend that you do, and make sure that any transportation services you offer are accurately reflected, and we can add them or fix them if there's anything that you don't see or that's not quite right. Another resource is our funding webpage, which is a list of different types of funding, grants, and other opportunities. If you have an idea for how to expand transportation in your community, you're probably going to need some funding to implement that. Or if you want to look for some funding to maybe hire a little bit of help to help you work on your transportation projects, you can look here and see if anything looks like it might be a good fit for your needs. And then I would also invite you to connect with Mass Mobility. We have a couple peer networking groups, opportunities to connect with others who are working on similar types of projects in transportation in other parts of the state. So a volunteer driver program network for anyone who runs a volunteer driver program or who wants to start one. We just had a meeting, a virtual meeting of that network a couple of weeks ago with a presentation about insurance and liability issues. And back in April, the different programs updated each other on how they were all thinking about COVID-19 and adapting. And I have a similar peer network for anyone who does travel training, teaching people how to use the bus. But I'd also invite you to reach out to me directly. You'll get my contact information on the slides, or I can also type it in the chat later. But if you have a transportation question and you want to brainstorm with someone, or if you have an idea for a tool or resource that would really help you, let me know. Maybe I know of one that's out there already, or that might be something I can put together. So Mass Mobility is here to try to help you help your consumers with transportation. So you all are the experts in what is going to be most helpful to you to making that happen. I wanted to touch on reopening and transportation, since I know that is a big topic in lots of folks' minds right now. First, I wanted to stress that transportation is only one path to access. I think access is the real goal, helping people access food and nutrition, helping people access healthcare and well-being, helping people access social interaction. And so transportation is one way to make that happen. But since the spring, you've all been coming up with creative ways, other ways to make that happen, alternatives. And any of those that are working well in your communities, I think that's something worth hanging on to. Transportation isn't the only way for these things to happen. In terms of specifically reopening transportation, I'm sure you've seen the great guidance from MCOA, including sample communications tools to use. I also presented as part of an MCOA webinar specifically about transportation back at the beginning of June, which is online on their website, and I talked more about resources and approaches to reopening there. One of the big pieces I stressed there, though, was if you are a member of a regional transit authority, to reach out to them and see what they have to say, because they've spent a lot of time thinking about safety and transportation over the last few months and may have some useful resources to share. And then there's also some great information out there from the CDC, specifically about transportation, and from the Community Transportation Association of America, which is a national nonprofit focused on transit in small areas and rural areas. So that is what I had for an introduction. Has anything come in the chat so far?
No, not yet.
Okay. Well, I would welcome you to, if you have questions or thoughts for Mass Mobility, to enter them in the chat anytime. But then I think now we can move on to Kate and hearing about the Hilltown, if that's okay.
Thank you, Rachel. I think that we all know the problem, but I'll just restate it. Public transportation is built on efficiencies, putting as many people on a vehicle as possible to go to one destination, and that just does not work in our hill towns and many small towns where you have a sparse population and people are spread out. In addition, we have multiple larger towns that draw people. Some people shop and have their doctors in Northampton, some in Pittsfield, some in Greenfield. So there's a lot of challenges around looking at specific traditional transportation models in our area. Next slide, Rachel. Next slide, Rachel. Oh, there you go. So obviously, traditional transportation agencies don't want to be bothered with our problems. It just doesn't make sense. Traditional transportation models are built on cost effectiveness and efficiency, and we have no fixed route service in our towns, and we have very limited demand response because it is expensive and inefficient to operate transportation. And Rachel mentioned that we have creative solutions at Hilltown Community Development. I think that's kind of a polite word for we're very stubborn and we push forward, even though a lot of people say it doesn't make any sense and you can't do it and it won't work. And we just keep trying to push forward. Next slide, Rachel. So I get asked a lot, why is a community development agency operating transportation? So I do like to go over that really quickly. We have other programs specific to seniors. A lot of our affordable housing units are senior housing because we have an older population in the hill towns. We have a Hilltown Elders Network, which is an in-home chore service. And we do a lot of advocacy on rural issues. So in 2015, 2016, it started becoming apparent that the RTA contracts with COAs were really not a great model because our COAs are so understaffed in towns of the sizes that we have of the COA positions. I'm sure many of you know are just 10 hours a week, 15 hours a week. And that's just not enough to do all of the other responsibilities as well as operating a van service. So we were asked to take over our FRTA, one of their demand response contracts. Next slide, Rachel. The first thing we did in 2016 was to do an in-depth study of what people, what their challenges were, and to gather a lot of information on where they wanted to go, what times, what destination. So I'm really proud of that piece of the work as the foundation. Next slide. You can go to the next slide. And so from that, we took over the FRTA van and launched the Hilltown Easy Ride, which serves seniors over 60 in 5 of our hill towns. It is a contract based on ridership numbers, and up until now, FRTA has not been able to cover the full cost of the program, and we have to do supplemental fundraising to cover the gaps. Overall, it's been wonderful service. We love having the van. We've been able to grow ridership. There were some cultural challenges around rural seniors, thinking of the van as a certain way, or public transportation was not for them. And we've had a lot of fun and a lot of success making it feel like a community vehicle that the community has ownership of, and everybody works together, including our riders, to make it successful. We've got great drivers and dispatch and great partners in the community. Having said that, there are some limitations to the van, particularly on who uses it, where they go, the ages, the towns that are covered. Only 5 hill towns are covered. We have many more in our service area. I think one of the most heartbreaking things was coming across a person occasionally who had mobility challenges that had no access to a wheelchair lift, and they were 59 and we couldn't serve them. So it was a very rigid contract, and that was really painful when we came up against situations like that. There were also destination restrictions with the FRTA service area, and the van is pretty fuel inefficient for a one person going to a medical appointment. So if you go to the next slide, we launched the supplemental program, the Hilltown Driver Pool, in 2019. And we cobbled that together with a bunch of fundraising sources, grants from Mass DOT, Highland Valley Elder Services, Mass Council on Aging was a great, early and strong supporter of the launch. We crafted it very carefully to supplement the van and not displace it, because we really value the van. It's a really good tool to have for group outings and shopping, and anytime we can put more than one person on it. We are able to cover more towns with our driver pool, and we're able to be flexible on age restrictions, and because we don't have any contractual obligation. So it's been a really nice flexible tool. We thought we were going to go the route of a volunteer driver program, and because we were successful at fundraising, and because we had strong feelings about our senior population, what we've seen is that volunteer driver programs work very well in affluent areas, and we are not an affluent area. And so an affluent retiree has time and money to, participate in driving their neighbors, but in our area, many of our seniors struggle to pay their bills. So we wanted to make it a paid program, both to have more control over the professionalism of the program and the rides, and also knowing that many of our drivers also were really in need of money to cover their costs and their time. So we did switch gears to make it a paid hourly driver rate, and drivers use their personal vehicles, and we reimburse them for the trips that they give our riders. As I said, we have a lot more flexibility. We can serve more towns. We can go further to medical appointments, for example, in Springfield. The drivers are vetted and paid, and we've added capacity to, some struggling volunteer driver programs into the van. Some of the challenges, we did have conflicts over employment laws and insurance laws that were really difficult to work through. Mass DOT told us they had to be W-2 employees and not 1099 employees. And then that created some problems with the use of their personal vehicles and the insurance. So it took us a long time to launch and work through some of those things. And I think there's still a little bit of lingering issues, but I think, again, to us being stubborn and taking risks, we're just going to keep going forward as long as we can this way. I think those are bigger issues on the national level, like with Uber and Lyft being, 1099 and not employees, and what that means, and is that fair? And I think those things are going to continue to play out on the national stage, and we're just going to keep going forward the way that we can. Sometimes the personal vehicles can create customer service challenges, and by that I mean, we have one driver who's a smoker and they don't smoke in their vehicle, but yet they're still, so we have to be careful. We have to be sure what rider we put in that vehicle. If, do they mind? Do they have sensitivities? Things like that come up when you use a personal vehicle. And then, as I mentioned, there are insurance challenges. We work closely with our insurance company. We have extra insurance. They have extra insurance. That was the other reason why we ended up compensating the drivers, because we know they do need to have a little bit more coverage than the average homeowner.
Hey, Kate, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, there's some questions in the
Kate, I'm sorry, your sound's a little warbly. We do have a couple of questions for you on liability in the chat box.
Okay.
Around what's the town's liability if an accident happens with the driver in the private vehicle? And since they're paid, what's the driver's liability? Does he need different insurance or she?
So, yeah, I tried to answer that a little bit. Our drivers do need to have an additional capacity on their policy. Which is one of the reasons, again, why we compensate them. We even give them bonuses for a certain number of drives per year, knowing that they have additional insurance costs. So we also have worked with our insurance company on our policies and have extra coverage. And so we're actually a private nonprofit, an agency. So when you say town's liability, I think you mean our agency's liability. Sure, if something happens, our insurance company and the driver's insurance company will have to come up with some kind of equitable solution for anything that happens. So we do take more risks. I think some people are going away from that model with a private vehicle because of the risk. And so far, we've just decided to take the risk. And we also get put in a position, and we take it very seriously, of having extra due diligence, of having accident policies, accident procedures, forms, protocols, an annual assessment of our risks, just so that we are doing everything that we can. If something comes up, we can prove that we've taken every measure we can to operate safely, but yet we still go ahead and operate this way. And I think Rachel put something in the chat box with some more information that she can share on that as well, if you're looking at insurance and risk policies.
Oh, I was just offering, yeah, if anyone is interested more in volunteer driver programs, then I'd be happy to share the presentation that was done to the Volunteer Driver Program Network 2 weeks ago about insurance and liability.
All right, so we can go on to the next slide, and if we have any more insurance questions, we can take them at the end as well. Some of the challenges are pretty, again, our way of doing transportation is not cheap, and it's not efficient, and that will always work against us in the transportation world, on state and federal level when you're applying for grants. And I think, we just kind of own that. It's always going to be subsidized, and that's just the way it is. We're willing to keep seeking supplemental grants. We're willing to just keep doing things as long as we can, as long as we have the money. And yet there's still unmet community need. Particularly, one example is travel to work. We don't provide that at all. We don't know how we could do that. And so that's something that our community, we haven't been able to address. But having said that, I do think that we've just done a great job between the two programs, that every senior who calls us needing a ride, we're able to find something for them one way or another. Next slide. I think the next slide, we just wanted to touch on COVID a little bit. When I wrote this last week, we were still working on our policies and procedures. And so I have some question marks in there that, we weren't quite done with them when I wrote this, although we're getting closer. Again, we know there's some risk. We know there's some challenges. Our goal is that we frame this as an essential service, and we just keep trying to work through the challenges. Pre-screening riders when they call to book the ride about their health, wearing masks, cleaning the vehicles, spacing in the vehicles. I had put in there about the wheelchair lift, and after I wrote that, Rachel sent me some nice protocols, so we're able to incorporate those and at least know that we have a plan in place to be as safe as we possibly can. If a driver needs to help someone onto the wheelchair lift, we know they can't keep 6-foot distance, so we just are going to put certain procedures in place to keep everybody safe. I mentioned one of our main challenges is the expense. and COVID makes it worse. That's about all it is. For example, with the van, we're going to have to go from 2 shopping trips a week to 3 because of the passenger spacing. People are sitting every other row and 1 person per bench seat, so that's very limiting. So adding that extra run-in is more expensive. Our driver costs, they're going to be, it's more expensive to pay the drivers because of the cleaning times added into their driving times. Everything that we ask them to do is going to add into the cost. So, COVID has challenges. We're willing and able and working to address them. I think that the question is how long, how long before it really gets to be a financial burden, and how sustainable is it? We're not looking that far down the road yet because the pandemic is new and it's different every week, and we'll just doing the best we can in the short term, and we'll see what happens next year. And then the other COVID thing that I just really want to reiterate with you for what it's worth is our drivers. There is a driver shortage in the state. Drivers are hard to find for the RTAs. They're hard to find for any transportation program. We pay our drivers more than most Council on Aging drivers. We pay them $15 an hour. And we're just very aware that while it's always been a low paid job, and now we're asking them to take more risks. So the office staff is here working at home, safe and unexposed, and yet we're asking our drivers to go out there and work with public. So we just are really, really conscientious of our drivers' comfort and trying to take care of them through this time. I think that was, so I'll reiterate what works for us. We're really stubborn. We don't look at it the traditional way in terms of efficiencies. We look at it, it's about people and taking care of our community. It's really a human service. Our clients are a very important part of that team. We always see them as partners, and they are partners in this. They work with us when something goes wrong. It's been a really interesting dynamic when the van breaks down or it's late. They're very understanding, and they treat it just like you would a shared family vehicle. If you loan your nephew the car and he's late getting it back because he has a flat tire, you're going to be okay because, these things happen. And so we really have that feeling with our transportation program with our riders. They're part of our team as well. We just keep advocating that rural is different, and we're a nuisance, at the state house, at the state level, and even at the federal level, that this transportation will never be sustainable without subsidies. And the last thing that I really, always wanted to point out is that we couldn't do it without our partners and our funders and our partners. They include our local community health center. Cooley Dickinson Hospital has been a good financial supporter and full operational partner. Highland Valley Services, Mass Council on Aging, as I said, and then our local councils on aging as well. And then I think the last slide is just my contact information. If anyone has questions, please feel free to email me. And I did a look in the chat box because there was a question. If someone can't wear a mask due to a medical condition. No, we haven't refused the ride. And we have trained the drivers. There are certain people who are not able to wear masks, and if the driver's masked, and maybe we provide some extra spacing for that client on the van, but we have not refused over that issue. Yeah, and I think Tara also pointed that out in the chat.
Are there any other questions for Kate right now? We're gonna go. We'll put everyone's slides up on the website later today or this week. So don't worry if you don't have them right now. We'll throw them up there.
I think, so Kate, you're going to take down your slides and Leanne is going to share hers.
I have them.
Okay.
Here's Leanne.
Oh,
Thank
great.
you, Rachel. Hi, everyone. I am Leanne Taylor. I'm with Walk Boston, which, as Susan said in the intro, is a statewide pedestrian advocacy group. I'm going to be talking to you today about one of the programs that I help run, which is age-friendly walking. And specifically, we'll be talking about this in the context of small and rural towns. So the next slide is just a map of all the places we've worked. I looked at the names. Many of the people on the call are represented in these orange communities. So we have worked in many places. You can see the Hilltowns area that Kate's from. We work often with Kate in the Hilltowns CDC, and we will continue to do that next year. And then Western Mass represented too, as some of our more rural areas that we work in often. So I'm just going to start with a little bit about age-friendly walking and then jump into a case study about rural walking in the Village Center and talk a little bit about how, as an MCOA, you can kind of join in on this work in your own community. So just a little framework for age-friendly walking. I guess all of you all are experiencing this in your community as well, which is that walking is more important than ever during COVID. We see more people out walking, more people of all ages using this as a way to keep their sanity, keep their physical health, mental health, and you know, especially for seniors, we see more walking in community just to access goods that you need, access you know, all of the things that maintain a good quality of life. Walking is important for, and that's true of rural and small towns as well. And age-friendly walking fits nicely into the age-friendly communities movement, which many of you, I'm sure, are heavily involved in. Age-friendly walking helps, it crosses many of the 8 domains of age-friendly communities, public space, open space, outdoor opportunities. So we have been able to sort of plug into that age-friendly communities conversation with this as a partner to help communities understand why, you know, working on active transportation may not be what you think of first in your age-friendly communities, but it's definitely something that we hope you'll have on your radar because, you know, while rural and small towns maybe aren't dense enough to walk to the grocery store, it's still important to have places where people can walk for recreation so that they can age in community. Next slide. So when we think about age-friendly walking, these are some of the things that come to mind. The next slide will show a little bit about this in a rural context, but some of the things that are talked about most often in rural areas. So you have to walk a longer distance. It's nice to provide benches between things people are walking to. So if you know somebody might make the route from the post office to the library, is there a place to stop in between? Or if you have a park in your village center, is there a bench between that and the local restaurant where people may be getting their coffee? Lighting, shade, and then some of these other things which are more traditional, you know, crosswalks, slowing traffic down, better signals. So these are some of the things we think of for infrastructure. Next slide. But our work, like I mentioned earlier, has taken us to many rural towns of Massachusetts, but while all of them have some unique challenges that they face, there are some commonalities that we see when we're out working in rural communities. And this slide just sort of shows some of the things you may notice in your own community. A lot of the roads that go through village centers are owned by MassDOT. So towns feel a little bit of a challenge when they're trying to make some changes to the roads to address these issues. We work closely with MassDOT and have seen over our 30 years as an organization that their mindset and frameworks changing a little bit on this. And the case study I'll share shows an example of that. But these are things that we always are working with towns to help think through. How can you slow cars down that are coming through your village? How can you make connections between the things in your village center? So somebody might drive to park there and then walk to the different things in the center. How can you get people across multiple lanes of traffic safely? And how can you create more crossing opportunities? So these are the things that I've been working on with rural communities in my age-friendly walking work. And I'll talk about a case study next, which dives a little bit deeper into this. So this past summer, we started working in the Berkshires with some workshops where we went out and we helped people understand what is age-friendly walking, how can we address it in our communities. And as a result of that, many of the towns in the Berkshires reached out to us for some follow-up. One of them was Egremont, which is a small village in the southern Berkshires that actually is undergoing sort of a reimagining of its village center, with its main street being completely re-envisioned for active transportation. This obviously isn't something that we're used to seeing. It was an excellent opportunity for people to have a voice in what they wanted their village center to look like. So this may not feel applicable to you. I'll jump into the lower cost things that you can do, fear not. But so this is a huge project that's going on. And I just listed here some of the partners that were engaged in the work from the beginning. And I think this case study just shows an excellent example of how MassDOT left it to the people of Egremont to decide what they wanted for their village center. We're really open to hearing their top priorities and needs. And, this was multiple months of, them deciding what they wanted, MassDOT saying what was feasible, and trying to come to a middle ground. And I think, Egremont is a great model because they are tiny, very tiny, but they have a post office, a library, a couple stores, a restaurant. So they have a really vibrant village, but doesn't have any walking infrastructure. You can see in this picture that that's an example of a sidewalk there, which is probably true of many of your towns as well. You can go to the next slide. So this group, like I said, they had in mind, once they heard that this was happening, they banded together quickly to say, these are the things that we really want to focus on. We want to make this continue to feel like a village. We don't want to lose parking, and we want people to really slow down. Like I said earlier, speed is something that everybody talks about. This community was so it's a state road 23 that goes right through the heart of downtown with, vehicles traveling at 50, 60 miles per hour. That doesn't feel like a place you want to walk. So they also wanted better lighting, better crossings, and they wanted to talk about maintenance because I'm sure many of you in rural places know snow. If you have sidewalks or if you have shoulders, getting MassDOT to manage the snow doesn't always happen. So they really wanted that to be prioritized. This is just a picture of Egremont Village Center. It's hard to tell because it's tiny, but essentially they're going from no sidewalks to two side sidewalks. They're going to have bike lanes. They're going to have 3 extra crosswalks. They're going to have some little islands at the beginning and end to get people to slow down. But these first few concepts that they put out didn't have all that the town really wanted to see, especially in terms of speed. We know that if you do include sidewalks and you widen a shoulder, you will get cars to slow down because the lanes will be more narrow, but that isn't going to prevent people from maintaining a 55 mile per hour speed limit. There is a one-room schoolhouse downtown, so getting kids to cross 50 mile per hour speeds is not something that we want to, it's kindergarten and first grade. We don't want them to have to do that. So the town really said, how can we rethink about this to get cars to really have to physically slow down before they come into our village? So we worked with them to do a walk audit, to talk to the design team, to come up with some alternatives that the town was happy with and that MassDOT was happy with. And we also, lighting wasn't involved at all in this conversation. Lighting's a very sensitive thing when you don't want light pollution in beautiful rural places, but you do want well-lit crosswalks and sidewalks, especially for seniors. So we managed to get some historical feeling lighting options in the plans. We managed to get some gateway treatments, which is, when you're driving into a town and you see signage and planters and all these things that make it feel like you're entering a place where people are walking, that really slows people down. So they added that at both ends. So I think this is just to share this example as, when MassDOT opportunities do come along where walking is considered. So having a constituency of people in your town who care about walking to be able to band together, to voice concerns, to know in your mind what matters to you as a community for better walking. Is there a part of town you wish felt safer? And and having a list of priorities. Egremont was ready to go. They were ready to list that out, and they spoke for, they were able to speak on behalf of the whole town because they had a consensus about this before this project. So I think that it's just a good example of getting what you want as a village and getting walking to be safer for people of all ages. So the next slide, this is just zooming out a little bit from Egremont. So not everybody has the opportunity to have a $2.8 million infrastructure project in their town, but that shouldn't keep you from thinking about walking or thinking about how to incorporate walking into your age-friendly community plans. So I've been working with communities through my work. The focus is rural communities and gateway communities. And I've been working with, at this point, about 8 communities to help sort of look at how can you assess walking needs and how can you plan for walking improvements that are short-term and low cost, because that's really important for smaller places that don't have the funds to do these types of things. So the sort of early step in all of this for these 8 communities has been bringing everybody around the table. I think walking is an interesting opportunity to bring together almost all of the sectors of the town. So DPW may not show up for your healthcare access meeting for your age-friendly programs, but they will show up for this. And it's a way, walking's a way to get more people at the table. And it's also a way to get short-term wins to keep the momentum for age-friendly communities going. Obviously, all of you all know this part, but involving older adults, Councils on Aging are one of the earliest partners that I reach out to, and they're great about getting seniors on the committees to think about walking priorities. And this is a picture of just that. So we train seniors on how to do walk assessments in Belchertown, and they're out there doing their own walk assessment to figure out their priorities, what, you know, getting a list of what they want. And, you know, I've been helping people think through this short-term low-cost strategy and also some policies, which you can learn more about in our, I have it linked on the next page, but we put together a little resource guide for people who want rural infrastructure suggestions, both policy and built environment. So that's on our website, and I have that linked on the next page. So that's kind of a nice little menu of things for your committee to look at and say, oh, you know, widening a shoulder is something that we really wish we could do. We don't want sidewalks, but we want a wider shoulder with more paint. And there's some costs associated with that. That's an example. I also have listed out here funding. So another good thing about including walking in your age-friendly plans is that there are constant rolling opportunities to get some funds to implement some of the things that your committee comes up with. Here, there's 3 here listed. There are many others, but one that's COVID related right now is the Shared Streets and Spaces opportunity, which is expanding walking areas for recreation and for commerce. And I've been reaching out to some of my rural partners in Franklin County, and there are many towns who are applying for these, you know, throughout Franklin County, and I'm sure many other towns are, but this is just some examples of funding. You know, not all age-friendly plans and processes have funding attached to them, so it's easy to sort of lose steam. But if there are constant and ongoing funding opportunities, it's a good way to keep your committee meeting, keep them coming up with ideas. You know, having shovel-ready projects is really important for infrastructure funding at the state and federal level. If you can say, this is a real priority to us, meet with your district, MassDOT district, and say, we really want this to happen, it's just all the more likely that you'll get those changes made in your community. So you can go to the next slide. So here's just a little bullet list of things that I can do with your community. All of these things can be done virtual. We're figuring that out right now. We've been testing it out. So if your Council on Aging is interested in thinking through age-friendly walking strategies, I'm happy to talk with you. I'm happy to do mini trainings, to think through some plans. I'm happy to do any of that. Also here is the link to the Rural Walking Report that provides some infrastructure ideas and some policy ideas. And then our website also just shows all of the places we've worked and what we've done there. So if you want to click on your town and see what we've done, or maybe what we could do, that's a great Sorry for the sirens. That's a great way to do that. And that is all. If anybody has any questions.
There's no questions, but I just threw up the link, even though we're going to put the slides on our website, I threw up the link for the rural walking toolkit.
Thank you, Tara.
So I know you had great links in there and folks can grab them all at one time. But does anyone have any questions for Leanne or any of the other presenters? The dead silences.
I'd also welcome people to share if you're doing creative things in your community or if there's something really on your mind, feel free to share what you're doing as well as ask us questions.
Okay, well, I don't see any hands, and I think if nobody else has any questions, I want to thank the three of you. You did a fabulous job, and I thank you very much for joining us today, Leanne, Kate, and Rachel. And yeah, I think if that's it, I want to wish everybody a great day, and thank you both to the presenters, the three of you, for joining us and making this a great workshop.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.